Okay, Jai Baba, everyone. So this topic today is on Dr. Ghani and his manuscript, the draft of the book that he composed in the late 40s using material Baba gave him, and in particular the chapter in his book that is the first draft of the 10 states of God. That chapter in God Speaks. I guess Sufism Reoriented has had material relating to this all along, but the manuscript that I've worked with was found in the Avatar Meher Baba Trust archives about 2 or 3 years ago. I think actually Jessica and Jean Munsiff were going over stuff, material, and Jean took a photograph of a whole bunch of different pages. And I looked at that one and I said, this is Ghani's manuscript, it couldn't be anything else. So they very quickly scanned the whole thing. And indeed it was. And this is for people with an interest in God Speaks or Baba's teachings, Meher Baba's darshana, since I've been using that word. This is a real important part of that whole story. So today I'll be giving some basic information, introduction to all of it. Once again, go ahead and chime in as you feel prompted to do. There will be no program like this next Friday, but the Friday after that there will be. And the topic for that session is subtle physiology, that is to say, things that Meher Baba said about the human body and its cosmological significance. It seems to me there are enough things Baba did say about that as to leave no doubt that that is real, that there is an important cosmological significance of the human body. But the things that Meher Baba said with it are just a piecemeal, a little bit here and there, and he never gave a sustained or integrated presentation of the subject. So I'll just be going over some of the various things that Baba made. That topic in particular is something where I can just talk about what Baba said, but others may have more to say about it if you want to chime in, because the term subtle physiology is the term that gets used in discussions of this subject. Because other mystical, meditational, philosophical traditions all over the world have delved into this. It's all over the place. Like in the Bible, man was made in the image of God. There you have it right there. And yoga has it. Chinese cosmological treatments and Taoism and other places have it. So it's very widespread. The yogic stuff on the subtle body, the sukshma sharir, the 72,000 nadis of the subtle body, all this stuff has to do with the subject. And I personally think it may be relatable to the significance of the avatar as God in human form. So anyway, this is a topic in particular where your contributions are welcome, because I'm not the human physiology is not something that I've particularly studied, whereas other people have. Okay, here are a few images of Dr. Abdul Ghani Munsiff, one of Baba's early Mandali. He actually was a boyhood friend of Baba's back when they were in school. He was a Muslim, and met Baba again in 1921 or 22 in Bombay when Baba was starting, 21 maybe, even earlier. Here's a picture. This came out, actually this topic that we're exploring here today is going to get published in the next issue of The Glow. Some of you may have received this thing that.
No, that's one of Nashwan's photos.
It is. So this, it says Ghani in Bangalore in 1949. That would have been right before the beginning of the new life. So you see here Eruch, and that's Adi. And there's Ghani looking very serious.
And old.
And old, yeah. He definitely is showing his age there. Actually, on the very first few days of the new life where they had to walk a lot, he actually had a heart attack. And he kept on walking anyway, despite it all. And he died during the new life.
When did he die?
1951. And Baba gave a message, and Baba was very, I'll read a little bit from it, very affected by Ghani's death. He said there was a lot of work which Ghani could have done for him and no one else could. I suspect that God speaks may be one part of that, because it looks like Baba wanted to dictate that to Ghani, but then Ghani went and died. Here's some images of him. Here he is right next to Baba. This is later on, taking dictation from Baba. Here is Ghani right there. He and Ramju. This is in Lonavala. You know Lonavala, in the mountains between Pune and Bombay. And in 1926, Baba dissolved the ashram in Mehrabad. And they took off and stayed for about 10 days there at a bungalow. And Ghani and Ramju were partners in a flour mill, grind flour near Lonavala, not too far away. So there's Ramju and there's Ghani, and they were linked by marriage, in fact.
And aren't they holding one another's children?
I think they are.
Yeah.
Right, so that's Ramju's kid and that's Ghani's kid.
Mm.
Yeah. And this is what page of the manuscript that we're concerned with here. So I'm going to start because I actually gave this very talk at the Legacy program back in February at Mehrabad, which ran to about 45 minutes. So since we have more time, I think I'm going to start with a general history of God Speaks, because this is very relevant to that. I don't know why I have this slide up front, but okay, let me jump back to start of this. So I'm going to read a bit from A History of God Speaks, written by Ira Dietrich. There's a little pamphlet on the history of God Speaks. So in May 1947, Baba began dictating to Dr. Ghani what was to become God Speaks. Just prior to this, seemingly not by coincidence, Baba had Dr. Ghani read Hafez's ghazals to him from late evening until 4 a.m. for 21 days. Ghani appeared to be progressing more slowly than Baba wished in turning the material Baba had dictated into a manuscript. For in February 1948, Baba dictated an agreement that he made Ghani sign before witnesses, promising to finish the book by the end of May 1948. I'm going to have a little anecdote to tell about that. You know, Ghani was famously brilliant and famously lazy. He was world-class lazy. Even this wasn't sufficient to goad Ghani out of his lazy ways, because by November 1948, Ghani had still not finished the book. Baba continued to dictate original, additional points. And I'm going to see. So then the New Life intervened. Ghani, of course, was one of the companions on the New Life, and he died during it in 1951. And so the New Life ended in end of January 1952. And then later that spring, Baba went to Myrtle Beach. In 1952 at Myrtle Beach, as stated earlier in this article, this is Ira Dietrich's article, Baba referred to Ghani's manuscript. I dictated all the points to Dr. Ghani. He worked on it, and now I find half of it has not been included. Half has been just as I wanted. I have brought the manuscript here, and when I am free, I will go through the whole thing and make necessary changes. It'd be interesting to know which manuscript that was. Maybe we have to work that out. The Sufism Reoriented has a lot of material, which apparently is different from what we have at the Trust, a different manuscript. By July 16, 1952, Baba had reviewed the manuscript and concluded, now I shall take this manuscript home, and I shall have to write the whole book over again. Baba began dictating the book again in August 1953. Okay, it seems natural that Baba turned to Dr. Ghani to write the first manuscript because of who Ghani was, though he was not destined to complete the manuscript. Upon Ghani's passing in 1951, Baba said, of the many things I had to renounce and suffer in this new life, the passing of Ghani is among the greatest. Amen. But this sudden wrenching away of Ghani is a disaster for me. To me, more than any of you, Ghani was unique. And of all the work that still remains to be done for me by others, there is much that could have been done for me by Ghani and no one else. That big head of his was truly a treasure house in which wisdom and wit were blended to perfection. We were intimate friends since our earliest years, and no one knows better than I how courageous and how loyal and loving was his heart. To me, therefore, Ghani is irreplaceable, both as a friend and as a tool for my work. That's quite a tribute to he's one of the truly great disciples.
Where were those extracts taken from?
That was given during the New Life.
No, as in Ira's quoting, which publication is he quoting from?
I don't remember if he cites it. It might be in the New Life Circulars. I'm not sure. It could be from there. I mean, I've read the original. It's somewhat, I can't recall. It might be in the New Life Circulars. This was during the meeting in Hyderabad in June or July of 1951 that Baba gave this message out. He had wanted Ghani to come. I don't know if you've read any of the stories of Ghani, but they're really, really funny. He was so clever. He would I think it was cigarettes, or they could only smoke 5 BDs a day. So he made BDs.
Is he the guy that used to wear his clothes to bed?
Well, he would always dress nicely, coat and tie, and he would go to sleep that way so that he wouldn't have to put them on when he There was one time where they were supposed to take a cold bath every morning, I don't know. Ghani was not an early riser, as you can imagine. So Ghani would go into the bathing room and close the door, and he would throw water around and make all these agonizing sounds like he was suffering from the cold water. And one time Baba just burst in and so there are so many stories like that.
Our son Brandon used to do that. He would pretend he was in the shower. Come on.
So he's Dr. Ghani in training. When I first, in the 70s, and I was first getting to know who some of the Mandali were, I asked Eruch, what was Dr. Ghani like? And Eruch could immediately see that I knew a certain amount about him. And so he told a couple of stories like this. I actually started by saying, Dr. Ghani was the very living personification of everything that we weren't supposed to be. And then he told a couple of these stories, but then he said this was the real, he said, of course, all this was just on the surface. He was a priceless jewel. That was the thing. A lot of this, I think, was for fun. You know, the spirit of, he would shatter pietism and, you know, this goody-goody spirit of things. He would say these outrageous things. And I think Baba greatly appreciated that, and I think it greatly helped his work. Binu Barucha one time was just talking about being with the Mandali in the 40s. Baba wasn't there, 43 or something. And there was someone else who had been born on February 25th, 1894, but a few hours later. So this other guy was saying, I was destined to be the avatar, and this Irani went and jumped in ahead of me. You know, so they were riffing on this joke. And so Dr. Ghani was kind of checking out to see which avatar he wanted to follow. So he was saying, if you were avatar, would there be mandatory whiskey before prayers? He would say these really, you know, outrageous things all the time. So he was great company, and he was great company for Baba as well. So that's a big part of a lot of this, you know, when you hear about him being lazy. He wasn't just lazy, he wasn't really lazy. It was something other than just that.
Sometimes lazy.
What was his doctorate, Will?
He got some kind of a medical degree. It wasn't a doctorate. I don't know how he ever got it.
Probably wrote it himself.
He, somewhere up in Delhi, he somehow got some kind of a medical degree. So he was a, I think, a homeopathic doctor. Yeah. And so he had a clinic, actually. So they always called him doctor. In the early diaries, he's always referred to as doctor. Doctor said this, doctor said that. So and he would sort of come and go a lot with Baba. He had a wife, he had children, so he had family responsibilities, but he would come for a couple weeks and leave. He and Ramju were both like that. The Mandali felt grateful to Ghani because over the years, much that Baba revealed on a mystical level is owed to Dr. Ghani Munsiff. It was because of Ghani that so many interesting explanations came from the master. Whenever Ghani was eager to hear a discourse or explanation from Baba, he would say something in jest or somewhat sarcastically to goad Baba into giving a talk. He'd make some outrageous comment about God or something like that. And Baba, of course, knew what he was doing, but so it would provoke a discourse from Baba, which was actually what he wanted. Ghani would never miss the chance of availing himself of Baba's good moods and would lightly complain about something so that Baba would reveal some explanation about the inner path or God. Baba reviewed Sufi gnosis with Ghani frequently over the years. Ghani was quite knowledgeable on Sufism. He was a Muslim, of course. He also revised and enlarged Ramju Abdullah's first pamphlet on Meher Baba's gnosis, The Philosophy and Teachings of Sri Meher Baba, compiled for his own dictation for the Meher Baba Journal, which Ghani actually was the editor of after Elizabeth Patterson left. You may know The Philosophy and Teachings of Meher Baba. It was published in 1933, and you have an original copy here in the library, in fact. He was Baba's Sufi. Baba also said of him that Ghani had grasped and assimilated the points in the divine theme chart. Those are charts given in 1943 and published in that little booklet. So well that there was nothing left for Baba to explain. So it is not surprising that Baba turned to Ghani for the writing that speaks.
But Ira writes quite well.
Yeah.
Has he written other things?
What's that?
Has he written other things?
A little bit, here and there. He did the editing of Ramju's diary, that book, you know, that was published in the 70s.
Yeah. Did you think that was good?
Huh?
Did you think that was good, his editing?
Yeah, I'd have various things to say, it being my own specialization, but no, he's a very, very brilliant guy. I think he was like Yale PhD or something like that. Yeah. He's the president of Sufism Reoriented, right?
Has been for 40 years or more.
Yeah, I think Ivy Deuce selected him for that role when he was a young whippersnapper.
Brian's behind the throne.
So in August 1953, so now we're after Ghani's death, Baba began dictating God Speaks to Eruch Jessawala. Eruch jotted down the points and wrote them out at night. Actually, I remember Eruch talking about this. He would be in the quarters where the mandali were. This was probably Shatara, I imagine. Does anybody remember exactly where Baba was? Yeah, no, Dehradun. No, he says Dehradun. And all the other mandali were talking and, you know, bantering, as, you know, you do. And it was hard for Eruch to concentrate, so he put a blanket over his head and put a lantern under the blanket. How he came out of the process unsuffocated, I don't know. And would take Baba's notes and write them up to have them ready for Baba for the next day. Baba continued dictating points to Eruch in Mahabaleshwar in January 1954. Again, Eruch jotted down the points, wrote them out, and read them to Baba. Baba's dictation to Eruch continued through June in Satara. Eruch completed his writing work in July. Balkalchuri was given the duty of organizing the material into chapters and getting the manuscript typed. A local typist was hired to type it, working 8 hours a day. Bal read the material to him as he typed, and the manuscript was finished in about a week. So I'm going through a little bit of the history of God Speaks, because we're going to go back to the origins of the whole project. In September 1954, at the end of the men's meeting, you know, there was the 3 Incredible Weeks, as it's called, which Francis attended. Lud Dimphel was given the manuscript to present to Murshid Duz and Don Stevens to correct the grammar and punctuation and prepare for printing. The following letter was accompanied the manuscript. I think this is from Mani, yeah. Dear Ivy, this is to explain the closed manuscript for God Speaks, notes and articles which Baba wishes you and Don Stevens to work in collaboration. As you will note, there are 2 separate packages. The file marked number 1 contains notes and articles dictated personally by Baba, taken down and worked on by Eruch. The packet marked number 2 is the incomplete manuscript of Dr. Ghani's book that he was working on years ago, and which was revised by Dr. Duncan by Baba's orders. The final typing suspended for want of clarification on many points, which could only be done by Baba himself. This was indefinitely postponed by the coming of the New Life phase, during which Baba stopped answering any and all questions on spiritual subjects, because he had renounced his God state and was just an ordinary seeker of God, and thus incompetent to give answers on spiritual questions. Hence, manuscript number 2 is far from final, was composed by Dr. Ghani and points and notes given by Baba, revised by Dr. Gonkin, still has irrelevancies and discrepancies, and also has many very good and interesting points. Baba wishes you to take as main foundation for God Speaks manuscript number 1, dictated personally by Baba. Leaving the sense in its entirety, he wants you and Don to make grammatical corrections, change the English of, alter the formation of any sentence or para as you like, delete unnecessary repetitions, etc., etc. In short, present Baba's work in the best way you can. Take from manuscript number 2, and now this would be Ghani's book, right? any point, article, or chapter you like and think good. Correct any discrepancy you may come across in Sufi terminology in Ghani's book that you may wish to use. In short, take whatever you like from Ghani's work to add to Baba's manuscript number 1 for the book. Then send to Baba the revised manuscript with any questions you may have. Baba will have it read out to him and will return the final to you for printing. You are allowed to write him in regard to the book, and Baba will clarify any point that is doubtful or not clear. His love and blessings to you, Don and Charmian, by order of Abdul Ghani. So that was the directive that Ivy Deuce got, and she and Don Stevens were the editors of God Speaks, which was published in the next year. In fact, it was published at exactly the same time that Baba had the 1955 Sahabas for 4 Indian language groups. And actually, Francis was invited to that, along with Don Stevens, I think the only Westerners who came. I think Irene Coneybear might have, was she there a little bit? She may have been, yeah. But it was very, there was quite a distinction for Francis and Don to be invited to something that was for the Indian language groups. I think Don came for a week, and I think Francis was there the whole time. And the account, you'll find an account of it in Listen Humanity, the whole first section gives an account of 1 week's experience of the Sahabas. But the thing that I find striking is the Sahabas was all about the intimacy of give and take between the lover and the beloved. Baba was, very intimate, informal with all the Sahabasis. It wasn't a darshan. Sahabas means company with the master. And there weren't all that many of them, like 100 each in each group. And but it wasn't full of lectures and talks and stuff like that. So it's like the intimacy of give and take between the lover and the beloved at exactly the same historical moment gets published, God Speaks, which is completely the opposite. It's on God's, it's the impersonal God is what really gets explained in God Speaks. There's very little about love in it. Love hardly gets mentioned. The lover-beloved dynamic hardly gets mentioned at all. There's not much talk about the master and the disciple. That's not the subject matter of God Speaks at all. So you have this coincidence with the real apex on both of these accounts. I would have a hard time thinking of another meeting between Baba and a large group of lovers, not just his disciples, but a large group of lovers that was quite like this. He, didn't quite do that again. There were Sahabas events, but this was like something unique actually. And God Speaks is the summation of Baba's metaphysical teachings really. So they happened in the very same month, which strikes me as significant. Okay, at the series of Sahabas for 4 language groups in India in 1955, Baba emphasized the importance and unique nature of God Speaks. In his instructions to the attendees, Baba said, I want you all to take particular note that I would feel happy if each one of you not only possessed, but read and digested God Speaks from the first to the last page, as the last book of its kind by me. I will likewise be happy if those among you who can possibly do so will see that this work is translated and made available in as many languages as possible for those who cannot read and understand English. Of course, a lot of which has been done. In fact, I think Tian is translated into Chinese. Are there any other translators in attendance at the moment? Who's going to translate it into Australian?
You just have to change your accent.
Okay.
Francis did that in the States.
He did still.
Yeah.
But I was getting informed last night on some word, I forget what it was, some phrase that needs to, I wish I could remember it.
I think Felix had a go at translating into German once, but it's taken over like
by Don Stevens and his
well, I don't
group.
know, but yeah, but, like this was in the 70s, I got something.
Didn't someone try and just translate it into Hungarian?
Hungarian, really? That would be a difficult language. So here we have from Baba an actual directive to translate it. And if you study the history of scripture throughout the ages, this has often been a very big issue. You know, like the Quran, there's a lot of resistance to translating the Quran and emphasis on the Arabic. And the Bible, you know, it has been translated a number of times, but it's been an issue. And the Bhagavad Gita, when Gyaneshwar started rendering it into the old Marathi, he was strongly attacked by the Orthodox Swamis at the time. So here we have it from Baba, where unequivocally that he's asked for it to be translated. You will find God Speaks a very unique book. Never before have such things been disclosed by me. You will understand through your mind the why and wherefore of your being. So here Baba told them to read it and digest it, which of course has been done by everybody here.
When in 55 did the Sahabas occur?
Hmm?
When in 55 did the Sahabas happen?
I think it was
November.
November, was it? Yeah. And God Speaks came out that very month. Kind of quite a striking coincidence. Yeah, we had an event on the anniversary of it in 2005. Were you there, Lucy? David? At Mirabad. And a lot of the attendees were there. It was a big event on Mirabad Hill. 1,000 people were there. And it was quite, they really made a deep impression on those who attended. Most of them have gone and died since that time, of course. And now, as to the second edition, it was published in 1973, and people might ask, by what warrant is a new edition of God Speaks published after Baba's death? And the warrant is that Baba clearly had indicated that they should do so and had input into it. There are a bunch of new charts in it. Some of the prose it's actually just tweaked. It's very small things. Okay, as early as 1956, Baba wrote Murshida Deuce about suggestions for future editions of God Speaks. Among them was the following letter from Mani that February. Now, one thing Baba wants you to do for future editions, and that is add at the end of the book his previous article, "Existence is substance and life is shadow." This should appear at the complete end of the supplement, sealing the book, as he put it. And then there were various, During his seclusion in 1967, Baba worked on additions and revisions for a second edition of God Speaks. Now, it's not in Ira Dietrich's account here because he didn't have that information, but another thing that Baba was doing that year, going into the next year, was dictating to Francis points to be included in a new edition of God Speaks, which he wanted Francis to do. Francis never finished it because it doesn't appear that Baba just had, from my interpretation, the material is all in your archives here. David would be familiar with it. But it looks to me like Baba had indicated topics that he wanted to be reminded of, and then Baba would explain them. But that never happened. So I don't see how a new edition could have been done on basis of what's there. But it does indicate Baba did want a new edition of God Speaks. And we do have, 15, 20, 25 pages in Francis's handwriting of his re-editing of the prose, which Baba also wanted him to do. So that's actually an important fact about God Speaks. It was not absolutely finished to letter perfection in Baba's own rendering of it. And in 1967, Baba was checking and correcting the glossary of God Speaks, which Led Dimple had prepared. You know, in the second edition, there's a glossary there. Lud, you know Lud Dimphal, one of the Sufis of Sufism Orient, he prepared that glossary, and Bala too would read out every word and its meaning, which when required, Bala would correct according. Also, Lud included a chart he had drawn lining up all the stages of the spiritual path and included it with the glossary when it was sent to Baba. In 1969, Eruch gave, this is after Baba dropped the body during the last darshan. Eruch gave everything back to Lud with Baba's corrections and informed Lud that Baba wanted both the chart and the glossary included in the next edition of Lud Speaks. So that's how those things got in. There was a lot of correspondence between Eruch and Ivy Deuce, and maybe Lud Dimphal, I'm not sure, about other little changes and points to be put into the second edition, which
So
will...
what edition was that then if it was after 1969?
That was the second edition, which is the edition most of you would have. And one of the main changes it has is it includes several new charts, like the famous chart of Rano's. I'll show it in due course, but that was not in the first edition. A number of important charts were not there, but Baba did want those to go in. But Baba wanted a further edition beyond what we have, so if any of you have got a good channeling link with Francis, you know, get him on the job, you know, so we could do it.
Baba said to make existence is substance and life is shadow, the seal
Yeah,
of supplement of God Speaks.
yeah,
But
we
in the
just read
second
that.
edition, it was another kind of a lightweight essay on astral journey kind of thing.
Yeah,
Do you
it
know
is
what
there.
happened?
I don't know what happened. It is there,
It's the second
but
last.
it's not the very last item. Yeah, yeah, I don't know what happened there. I was wondering about that too.
It's in the Chinese edition.
Yes, it will be.
Okay, so this is a bit about the history, the subsequent history of God Speaks. And now we go back to the very beginning, which is Ghani's, Baba's work with Abdul Ghani Munsiff.
What does Munsiff mean?
It's a sort of an honorific title, Mr. or Distinguished or the Honorable, something like that. He was he was an impressive guy. A lot of the Mandalay actually were. You know the story of Vigil when he became a doctor all of a sudden? He had no medical training at all. But he would go, he went to, was this in Satara? Anybody know that he would go to the hospital and would just give out his pills? And he went to this whole wing of the hospital with incurable patients. And lo and behold, within a couple of weeks, they were all cured. And so somebody from the hospital showed up at the ashram and had with some gift they wanted to give to the doctor. And the Mandalay were saying, oh, you mean Dr. Nilo? No, it wasn't Nilo. Dr. Duncan? No, it wasn't him either. And it turned out to be Vigil, a total quack doctor who knew absolutely nothing about it. But he had such a bearing that, and he cured all the patients, what can you say? But Ghani was a totally different type, but he was so articulate and so clever and so funny. And he was also profoundly knowledgeable about Sufism. So now I'm going to read actually some from this, I think it'd be the best way.
How did he become so profoundly knowledgeable about Sufism?
I gather that he just took an interest in it from a young age.
Oh.
Yeah.
He's a Muslim.
He was Muslim, of course. And he must have had contacts in Pune. I don't really know what they were.
Was he well known to have read widely?
He certainly was in Baba's circle. Whether he was in the Islamic community, I wouldn't know. He was very critical of the state of Islam in his day, so he wouldn't have been very popular for the things that he was saying. And there's something of his that he wrote a booklet in, say, the late 40s that got translated, and it really expresses that. He appears to have been deeply, deeply concerned about the state of Islam and felt it very keenly. And in fact, that's very relevant to this book because it's really a kind of an integration of Meher Baba's teaching with Islam. It's really half about Islam and Sufism. So I'll read a couple of pages from, and this is the beginning of this article.
Which book are you referring to?
Hmm?
Which book are you referring to there?
Okay, and this is what Ghani wrote, has the complete draft of a book that he had finished and that's the manuscript of Ghani's that Baba gave to the Sufis.
Oh, okay.
So it's actually, I mean, for all the jokes about his laziness and so forth, and they are really quite enjoyable, he did a lot. And it's a serious manuscript. It's 14 chapters, about 300 pages.
So it's the God Speaks that didn't become God Speaks.
Yeah,
Mm.
Okay, right.
yeah. So here's what, okay, students of the history, so go ahead and interrupt as I go through this, so you don't stand on ceremony and you don't have to sit on ceremony either. Students of the history of God Speaks have long known that this project did not actually begin in 1953 to 54, when Meher Baba dictated to Eruch Jessawala what became the text of this great metaphysical masterpiece. The story of the book's origins goes back more than a half a decade before that to an earlier set of dictations from Baba to Dr. Abdul Ghani in the late 1940s. The whereabouts of Ghani's notes and the record of what he did with them have been one of the unsolved mysteries, at least to me, in the universe of literary research connected with Meher Baba's advent. But 2 years ago, a draft of Ghani's write-up was unexpectedly found in the archives of the Avatar Meher Baba Trust. And here's some images from it. This is what it looks like. This is from chapter 1. This is the opening of it. It looks like this. And contrary to what some of us had supposed, Ghani's manuscript is not merely a collection of points jotted down in random disordered fragments, but rather a major literary undertaking, far from complete. It's spanning several hundred pages on matters of high philosophy, and in particular the connection between Meher Baba's own teachings and philosophical Sufism. Dr. Ghani's work will certainly have to be studied and eventually published, both for its own intrinsic worth and interest, and for its connection with God Speaks. Yet what I want to focus on here is its second chapter, which bears the title, The 10 States of God. The ninth part of God Speaks goes by the same title, and the author of this chapter is Eruch Jessawala. And anyone who might wonder how one can assert that, one asserts that on the strength of this. The 10 States of God by Eruch Jessawala. It's right in the book. Actually, Gary Kleiner, way back, was seated at Eruch's table, I suppose, probably at the trust office, creating mischief, as Gary was wont to do, and pointed out to Eruch that he was in fact the author of the 10 States of God. And Eruch didn't know that. And as proof, Gary brought him the book and showed it to him. And Eruch shrugged and said, well, mine was the hand that wrote. That was his response. So he clearly didn't take himself to be the author of this chapter. But it must be that Baba directed that his name be put on that chapter, because he would never have done it on his own. So one of the interesting little details there. This information comes from page 157 of the text of God Speaks itself, which is this right here. For even though Meher Baba authored the book, he seems to have assigned and credited to Eruch the authorship of its 9th and 10th chapters. There are 10 chapters total. Yet the newly discovered manuscript proves that the original draft of this chapter was actually written up by Dr. Ghani before the onset of the new life in 1949. Even though Ghani's draft differs from the final published version in significant ways, there can be no doubt that Eruch, when he drafted the 10 States of God, must have had Ghani's earlier draft before him, and he incorporated much of Ghani's works, sometimes verbatim,
So,
that means word for word, into what he wrote. There are things that follow Ghani's manuscript word for word, so he must have had it. There's no other explanation for that. In view of the central importance of the 10 States of God and any overall assessment of Meher Baba's spiritual philosophy, or darshana, which is the word I've been using, the standing of this piece of writing as, in effect, a collaboration between Eruch and Ghani claims its place in the history of Meher Baba's writings in an important way. And now this is a little bit about Ghani's role in the earlier years of Baba's advent. I mean, I would really say that up through the late 1940s, Ghani and Ramju and then Deshmukh came into the picture were clearly the most important articulators of Meher Baba's spiritual philosophy or his darshana. And Ghani probably did more to bring it out of Baba than any of them did. Okay, that Meher Baba should originally have intended Dr. Ghani to serve as the amanuensis of his original dictations and the first drafter of the original material that later became God Speaks should hardly surprise us in view of the nature of the connection between the two of them, which extended back to the early years of the 20th century. Ghani and young Merwan Shahryar Irani had been childhood friends in Pune long before Baba's realization at the hands of Hazrat Babajan. When, after a lapse of a number of years, Ghani and Merwan met again at the home of Munshi Rahim was his name, in Bombay. At Munshi Rahim's house, there were various people who would meet there, and Baba was part of this whole group then. A lot of his earliest disciples started to congregate at that time. There were a bunch of Muslims at that time. But Ghani did not at first understand the transformation that his friend had undergone. In fact, when Ghani met Baba, he started making all these jokes and, lighthearted kind of remarks. And he noticed that the other people there were taking serious offense. And he thought, what is going on here? And he came to realize that it was no longer the marijuana. Baba himself didn't mind at all, and took it all in stride and resumed his acquaintance with Ghani on the old level, whereas the other people were getting really pissed at him. Within a short time, however, he had become one in the close circle of Baba's first disciples, and he remained such until his death in 1951. Dr. Ghani was endowed with a brilliant intellect. On top of this, he took a keen interest in spiritual philosophy and had cultivated a profound erudition in philosophical Sufism. Humorous by nature, Ghani would provoke Baba into giving explanations on spiritual subjects, and many of Meher Baba's early discourses came into being this way. Along with Ramju Abdullah and perhaps one or two others, Ghani was one of the disciples most central to the formulation of Baba's message and the writing up and publication of his discourses over the first quarter century of Baba's mission as avatar. After Elizabeth Patterson's departure from India in 1941, Ghani served as the editor of the Meher Baba Journal. Do you know the Meher Baba Journal? It was that magazine that Baba had published for 4 years, 48 issues, once a month. It was a really excellent.
Was it a magazine or a little booklet? What's the magazine?
But it's almost like a booklet. They did like about 100 pages per issue. It was a serious undertaking.
Like the
And-
Meher Baba Journal.
The Meher Baba Journal. In fact, Baba's discourses were first published there, serially, in the Meher Baba Journal. So Ghani took over the editorship of it. And over the last 12 issues of the Meher Baba Journal, he published there Meher Baba, His Philosophy and Mysticism, a rewrite and expansion of Ramju Abdullah's earlier book, Meher Baba, His Philosophy and Teachings, and what must probably be counted as the most systematic, sustained explanation of Meher Baba's philosophy and metaphysics prior to the publication of God Speaks itself. At least that's what I would say. It's really hardly at all known now. It's just buried there in the Meher Baba Journal. We have to republish it. For all these reasons, I wouldn't call the discourses a systematic exposition of Meher Baba's spiritual philosophy. It's a masterpiece, but it's not that exactly. It's something else. And indeed, Baba seems to have undertaken to do, for all these reasons, Ghani would have been a natural choice for Baba as the disciple with whom to collaborate in the composition of a major book of philosophy. And indeed, Baba seems to have undertaken to do exactly this in the years before the New Life. The New Life itself intervened in 1949, of course, and prevented the completion of this project. And on 20th August 1951, as the New Life was moving towards its culmination, Dr. Ghani died. He had a heart attack. In the course of a moving tribute to this great disciple, which we read a little bit earlier, Baba commented, "Of all the work that still remains to be done for me by others, there is much that could have been done for me by Ghani and none else." One wonders whether the completion of the writing of God Speaks might not have been part of what Baba had in mind here. Of course, Baba wound up dictating through Eruch, and of course, like others, I'm the greatest admirer of Eruch. And I've never heard anyone who could explain God Speaks type topics in the way that Eruch would do. At the same time, Eruch wasn't really interested in it. He rarely would talk about it and didn't really care for it very much. Whereas Ghani really did. And I think the book would have been really, really different if Ghani had wound up doing it. For one thing, Ghani would probably have brought up like objections and criticisms and quips and quibbles all over the place as Baba was dictating, which was part of his relationship. And that would have probably transformed the book quite a bit. Whereas Eruch, just whatever Baba said, he would take down and rewrite. So it would have been a very... I think Baba wanted Ghani, actually. Obviously he did, because he tried to do it with him. And I already read from Ira Dietrich's statement about how Baba started having Ghani read Hafiz to him every night in 1947 for 21 days. Now it is certainly true that, and Ira says, even this wasn't, Baba had him sign a contract to finish the book by a certain time. Can you imagine that? Even this wasn't sufficient to goad Ghani out of his lazy ways, because in November 1948, Ghani had still not finished the book. Baba continued dictating additional points. Okay, this is me again. Now it is certainly true that Ghani's legendary laziness and the quick wit with which he defended and often managed to win allowance for it have made for some of the best comic anecdotes connected with early ashram life. Eruch himself used to recall this period in the late 1940s when Ghani was supposed to be carrying out this work, and I remember him saying this myself. Taken to task by Baba for his failure to finish up by the various deadlines, Ghani complained that all his time was being devoured by small tasks, chores, and petty botheration. The upshot of the conversation was that Baba supplied Ghani with his own personal valet, right there in the ashram, to fill up his time for writing. Can you imagine that? For valet. He had his own valet. Here he's one of the disciples from only Ghani. And Ghani would, of course, take it right in stride and be perfectly happy with the situation. I think there was doubtless a bit of humor in the whole thing, because, I mean, anybody could see how outrageous this was. Sent by Baba to fetch Ghani one day, Eruch found him sound asleep on his bed, with his coat and tie still on. Ghani used to sleep this way in the daylight hours to spare himself the trouble of dressing himself when he woke. Meanwhile, the valet, obviously acting under orders, was waiting patiently with Ghani's toothbrush in hand and a dab of toothpaste on it. Eruch was amazed by the laziness of a man who could not be bothered even to put his own toothpaste on his own toothbrush, but had instructed his valet to do it for him. I still remember that. I couldn't believe that he was so lazy he couldn't even do that. Undoubtedly, Dr. Ghani's dilatory habits explain in part his failure to deliver to Baba a finished manuscript in the time frame that Baba wanted. Yet now that the full manuscript that he composed has come to light, we can see that there is more to the story than this. In fact, Dr. Ghani was engaged in a major literary enterprise, though not perhaps exactly the same enterprise as what Baba had assigned to him. In the performance of this task, he was drawing upon a lifetime's experience and treasuries of knowledge that he had collected, both from his discipleship with Meher Baba and from his studies in Sufism. And right in the early stages of this large-scale dissertation, Ghani had embedded a priceless gem of Meher Baba's own dictation, perhaps the most important single metaphysical exposition that Meher Baba ever gave. I personally, anyway, would consider the chapter, The 10 States of God, to be that. So now we'll take a closer look at the whole manuscript. Now here's the, let me see where it is. I'm in the right place. Sorry, let me here is, these are the 14 chapters that Ghani wrote. And it runs to about 300 pages or so. So let me run down the titles of the different chapters. These are the titles that appear on it. The first one is entitled God Realization, 24 pages. The 10 States of God, 34 pages. So that very chapter is right there. We don't have the chart. Baba clearly gave a chart, but it doesn't seem to have been preserved. And I don't think the Sufis in Walnut Creek have it either. At least last I heard they don't.
So did they have to prepare one?
What's that?
Did they have to prepare a chart to go with 10 States of God?
They must have, because it was published in the first edition of God Speaks. But there must have been one even for Ghani's manuscript.
And do you think they had access to it, to copy?
Well, they must have. I mean, Baba started dictating. In fact, in the History of God Speaks by Ira Dietrich, he mentions that Baba had a chart. It seems that the 10 States of God chart was in fact Baba's starting point in the dictation of God Speaks, even though it comes at the end of the book. But it hasn't been preserved. I would be very interested to see what Ghani had. There are certain changes that I'd like to see if they are there.
So is that available for you to access for?
What's that?
Is that what the Sufis hold? Is that available for research?
The Sufis material?
Yeah.
It's not yet. Yeah. I asked 2 years ago and again last year, but they're still doing the work of processing it. You know. Actually, in the next issue of The Glow, this basic presentation, what I was just reading from, will get published there. And also an article by Carol Connor, the Murshid of Sufism, on Ghani's manuscript also. I think you might have seen.
Have you read her article yet?
I haven't, no. I only know what
Have you read it,
said.
David? Have you received your copy of the latest edition?
It hasn't come out yet.
I think it's on the supplement to God Speaks and the use of Ghani's material in it. As you read, Baba had told Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens to go through the manuscript, and if they find anything useful, make use of it. And the supplement is that, okay, material taken from Ghani's manuscript. But it's only a little bit. I mean, the Ghani's manuscript is much bigger. Actually, a number of us read a lot of Ghani's manuscript
2 years ago.
2 years ago. You were there, Tony, for a lot.
Only
right?
for the first.
First one. John, you were there.
Yeah.
And Jeff and Chen, were you there? Anyone else here? We did read a whole bunch of that.
Kim and Richard.
Hmm?
Kim and Richard were there.
Oh, that's right, you were there. Yeah, I forgot. So I could just turn over this to you. Yeah. So a bunch of people here at the abode have actually seen it. So these are, I'm going to go through the other topics. You can get an idea of what the book was about. It's saints and saintliness. Ghani uses a lot of the Sufi terms and Sufi distinctions in explaining this topic. It's not just what we would conceive it to be. Master and disciple, right? There are several discourses on a subject like this. The path and the pilgrim, the journey, the 7 planes, or Haft Samawat. So this is about the spiritual journey, the journey of involution. God realization, and he has a chapter on love. Practical mysticism and meditation. You know, the discourses have 6 discourses on meditation, and practical mysticism would be the actual living out of mysticism in your daily life. The hierarchy of saints. There's stuff in the supplement of God Speaks about this, and Baba has given information about the hierarchy, right? Like there are always 56 God-realized souls. There are 5 perfect masters. There are 7,000 people, 7,000 offices in the spiritual hierarchy at all times, that kind of thing. That information is given here, plus some of the Sufi mystical background to it. Miracles, perfection and perfect master, and the Zaheb-e-Zaman avatar. This is the Islamic term for the expected prophet. This is in Shiite Islam, the Sahib-e-Zaman, the one who is expected to come. So the whole thing runs to about 278 pages. Yeah, Sim?
Yeah, well, was he aligned to any particular Sufi order, like the Chishti or an Arabic order or an Iranian order? Does anyone know?
I don't know, and I would really like to. I would think that he wouldn't have been very popular with any extant order because he was so critical of Islam. He's very sharp comments throughout it. For example, that Islam does not accept reincarnation and Islam does not accept God realization. Well, he's quite upfront about that. He
So
doesn't.
that wouldn't have been acceptable to the Chistis, you wouldn't think?
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think
okay.
the traditional Sufi orders would accept anything like that. It's quite blasphemous. Both of those things.
But in Inaya Khan's books,
Yeah.
he's from the Chisti. He
Yeah.
talks about reincarnation.
I don't remember that he actually affirms it.
I remember.
And Inayat Khan was actually, in my opinion, really radical,
Yeah, heterodox.
very heterodox. Yeah.
With the Sufis, I think it's different. Kim and I just finished reading a book called The Daughter of Fire, but she trained with a Naqshbandi
Yeah.
Sufi master, and they talk about reincarnation, things like that.
Well, maybe Sufis do now, but I don't think that historically, say before 1900, it would have come up hardly at all.
Is that a contemporary book?
Yeah.
Yes, it is a great book.
It would be kind of, I don't think historic, someone can correct me, but we could talk to someone. I've read a lot on Sufism, and sometimes some of the popular lore in the Baba world attributes to Sufism a lot of the beliefs that we ourselves hold. And that may be the case with some of the Sufi orders now. That could be, I couldn't say. But I don't believe that historically it was so. Even God realization and the I am God state, like Al-Hallaj said things like that, and you know what happened to him. He was crucified for it. And
I think reincarnation is also one of his blasphemies.
oh, was he blasphemed in that way too? He, I feel, as a perfect master, Baba did say that, marked a limit by transgressing it, getting himself killed. And thus you have very great Sufis like Al-Ghazali, I don't think he was a perfect master, but an intellectual giant and a spiritual one who would sort of make excuses for Sufis like Al-Hallaj, saying they would get so intoxicated they would forget things and say things that they didn't really mean, stuff like that. So it was really kind of beyond the limit of any kind of traditional Islam, and I think traditional Sufism too.
I think the Orthodox Islamic world, they don't accept those things like reincarnation. Within the Sufi tradition, which is, the esoteric thing, I think they do accept things
I
like that.
don't think so. Maybe today, but I don't think historically they have. I never have seen anything like that. Yeah,
I think it was a great blending of Sufism and Hinduism in North India, in Akbar's time and all of that. And if there was a blending, surely that reincarnation would have been a part of the basic tenet of that, of a blended view.
You know who would be quite an expert on that is Carl Ernst, who's working on precisely that.
There's a book by him in the library.
That book, Sufism in North America, Guy canvasses about 5 traditions. They don't seem to buy into that. Jeff's read that book.
In the book that I just finished reading about the Nakshmandi master, he says the Chishti and the Nakshmandi family, because they've been in India for so many centuries, so many years, they have incorporated many of the Hindu terms even, like samskara and other things. So I think the Sufi traditions in India, they probably are different from Sufis in the other countries.
Well, this is a very specialized subject. We really need to have studied all of that. But I'm deeply, let me just issue this, a caveat, shall I say, that I do feel that Baba lovers, we do have to be careful about attributing our own beliefs to other spiritual traditions. That does tend to happen a lot. But okay, but in any case, Dr. Ghani was very critical of the divines of Islam and says so for their refusal to accept those things.
In God Speaks, Rumi, Baba quotes a poem by Rumi. When I was a plant, I became a this, and when I was animal, I became human. Well, how would you see that if he didn't accept evolution and reincarnation?
I would be most surprised if general Rumi scholars would interpret that as his having given a version of the divine theme. Because he's a poet, and it's a poetic sort of statement. Now, we as Baba lovers might read it otherwise. There are some discourses of Rumi's where he talks even more explicitly that way. But I would be really surprised if most Rumi scholars would say that he was affirming.
So are you saying Rumi doesn't affirm anything like reincarnation?
Well, I personally would read it that he's talking about that, but he buried it in a mountain of work, which
just forget that particular poem.
Yeah.
How about the other works of Rumi?
I think we better close down this topic because it's a highly specialized
So I don't think to see that Baba people attribute their own understanding of Baba to Sufism. I think Sufism has become a very complicated issue. So if there are different schools, maybe different.
Okay, well, what I'm actually talking about is Islam and Sufism up through the time where Baba was doing this work. More recently, there may be all kinds of developments. I have no doubt that there are. But okay, this is a very specialized topic about what exactly Islam and Sufism has affirmed about this. And we better bracket that for discussion another time with people who know more about the subject than I do. But to look at perfection does not, when you look at this range of topics and the organization of it, it is not like God Speaks at all, in fact. It seems like a survey, an organized survey of different aspects of Meher Baba's spiritual philosophy that it looks to me that Ghani himself has organized. He was trying to give an explanation, an account of what Baba's teachings were. And when you read it also, it's very focused on Islam, overwhelmingly. There'll be occasional Hindu terms here and there, but not nearly so much, and very little Christian language. So what it appears to be to me is Dr. Ghani's own attempt to articulate Meher Baba's spiritual philosophy, his darshana, in which Islam and Sufism is thoroughly integrated, sort of a Sufism reoriented from the standpoint of a great disciple of Meher Baba. So it kind of does that kind of work. It does not appear to me to be an expression of anything like God Speaks. It's not centered on the divine theme, for example.
How do you compare some of the titles of the chapters to the supplement? But it reminds me of some of the supplement.
No. I'm talking about the main text of God Speaks, not the supplement.
No, this is a question I'm interested because I didn't go through your, previous, like miracles and spiritual hierarchy for the. In the supplement, are they included? This in the supplement?
Some of that material is. Sometimes I'm fine. Yeah, no, I'll be coming to some of this. A lot of this material is because, as mentioned, the supplement was taken from Dr. Ghani's manuscript. But the main text of God Speaks does not have this stuff. Here's another aspect of this manuscript that's, that I found to be highly entertaining anyway. I don't know if those of you who read it like John or Kim or Richard found it likewise, but it incorporates Dr. William Donkin's comments. And Baba had Donkin read it and give his critiques of it. And in the typed manuscript that we have, those criticisms of Donkin's are typed right in there. They're embedded in the text. And I had always heard this, that Dr. Donkin went over the book and put his criticisms. And I had always expected that Donkin would be very respectful and deferential, because after all, he was a comparative newcomer. He came in 1939, and Ghani had been there since Baba was just a kid, this old, venerable disciple, and he would be very respectful and circuitous in making his criticism. Not at all. He just really goes after him. They're never ad hominem. They're not personal, but he's quite blunt in the criticisms he makes. And they'll be started like, Ghani, oh Ghani, please, you have to explain, this makes no sense at all, and all these sorts of things are there. So it's quite funny. And they're brilliant. These are two brilliant men, actually. Those of you who have read The Wayfarers might concur with me that it's a masterpiece. And he was a real prose artist, too. His prose is gorgeous. So it's really, you're getting Donkin at his best, incisively criticizing Ghani. And then there will be drafts where Ghani responds. And Ghani seems to have accepted his criticisms pretty consistently and revised accordingly. So, Baba would sometimes with his disciples, tell one of them, go to get him, So he probably made it clear with Duncan that he wanted him to really light into him and don't hold back, and he didn't. And it really has improved the book a lot. In fact, we owe a lot to the both of them for the 10 States of God, where some of those criticisms resulted in real transformations of the text that are really pretty important. I could show some of those in a minute.
Or is this going to be published as a standalone manuscript?
Dr. Ghani's manuscript, I don't know. I think it needs to be. It will take an enormous amount of work. Here is another of the problems that results from what I've just been describing, that the manuscript that the Trust has is full of revisions and alternate versions and stuff like that. So it will be quite a job to figure out what the final draft is. Also, Sufism Reoriented presumably has a lot of material of its own. And I gather that it's not the same manuscript. Because I heard that Dr. Duncan's comments there are not embedded in the type that are handwritten by Duncan. So whoever did the typing must have either been Duncan himself or had Duncan's own comments. And it's really not a finished work. I would say each chapter is complete. It comes to an end. But a lot of revision and reworking of it is really needed, a lot of correction. So it would be quite a job. But I do feel that there is a school of opinion that says Baba had Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens select from it for the supplement to God Speaks. And Baba went over that and corrected it, so the rest of it should not be published. Some feel that.
Have the Trust in India sent a copy of their manuscript to Sufism Reoriented?
I'm not sure what I'm not there. I know there were discussions very recently about this because the topic has just come up. I don't know. Do you know anything especially? There are conversations between some of them. Pascal Kaplan was over there, so there might be something in it.
Because one can see how immensely important this topic is for Sufism Reoriented.
Yes, it very much is. Yeah. And actually, for a deeper understanding of Meher Baba's own spiritual teachings, it will be quite important too. I mean, Ghani was a major player. He was a heavy hitter.
So you yourself have found some new insights into Baba's teaching from reading this?
I would say yes. Although a lot of it I was already aware of from reading the supplement. If you read it closely, a lot of it is there. But yes, I did. Here's an example. I won't even try to explain it in detail, but reading, about Fana and Baka, those terms, those are basic Sufi terms about the spiritual path. Fana is an annihilation, and Baka is an abiding in. So you pass through an annihilation, and at the next stage, you abide in the next plane, for example. Well, I always found the discussions of that in the main text of God Speaks to be extremely confusing. And there were some real ambiguities that I just couldn't resolve, actually. And I looked at it very, very closely. Well, Ghani's manuscript clarifies it enormously. And he gives some really good analogies for that. Fana and Baka are two really big concepts in Sufism, as a matter of fact, some of the most important. And Baba brought them over extensively into his own account of the spiritual path. And Ghani's manuscript, I think, is very helpful in explaining that. That's one example.
Do you remember the gist of it?
I remember he gives an analogy, but you see, nowadays trains are not so central to our life as they were then. But he said, if you arrive at a new city, there would be rest houses close, right in part of the train station, not just a waiting room, but an actual rest house. So you'd get out and sleep for a period of time in the rest house. But then eventually you would be revived, wake up, and go out of it into the city outside. That going to sleep in the rest house is like fana, and baka is like emerging from it and experiencing the city. Now that's a nice metaphor. To me it certainly is.
So in the talks to the boys, he refers to the city as the skies of the plane.
Yeah, and he's talking about something kind of different there, where there it's the plane versus the asman, plane versus the sky. He doesn't talk about fana and baka there. So all these things need to be integrated with each other.
Differentiate.
And Ghani's manuscript does not contain any kind of discussion of the planes versus the skies. That isn't there. That really was, Baba gave it to the boys and not to the Mandali until, for decades. Yeah.
But it's the same analogy in cities.
Yes, it is. It is.
It's
Yeah.
there in both cases.
Yeah, it
And
is.
the train station is there.
Yeah.
But you think differently.
Well, in Ghani's manuscript, the fana is like going to sleep. It's like you're asleep, you're stunned, you're unconscious of your environment for a period of
But the
time.
environment is in fact the destination we're heading to.
Yes,
Yeah.
you've reached the next stage, not the final destination, but it's the next stage. But when you get into it, you're zonked out and unconscious of where
But
you are.
can't see any of the detail.
Yeah.
That's asleep.
And you're in a secluded, protected space for a period of
So there's
time.
no contact. There's just
I
Yeah.
think there's a more relevant, there's a discourse in Baba's discourse, it's called the stages of the path.
Yeah,
Baba talk about when you reach a certain plan, there's
yeah,
a period you're like asleep,
yeah,
rest, and then you go on. So
right.
that's more relevant than going to the sky or heaven, to the Fana and Baka.
Yeah, well, I think it's a different thing. I think the skies
It
are,
is, yeah, the sky is
it's a different thing. Yeah, there is that discourse and he gives the names of the different fanas.
Yeah.
But I had a very hard time working out. There are things in God Speaks that seem quite contradictory. But Ghani's manuscript is very helpful. So this is one example, fana and baka. There are a lot of other things that he goes into in depth. Here is what, I'll just mention this. It would take a lot of explaining. In fact, let me show you the chart where this is relevant. Here, I have to go this so I can see better. In God's, no, it's not here. Where is it? I'm looking for these charts. Sorry, here we go. This is it. Okay, this chart, which I'm sure is all of you are intimately familiar with it, and could probably, Harry could just rehearse it
That's all right.
from memory. But this
There's
was,
a lot of rectangles.
yeah, yeah. What do you think of from an artistic point of view? There-
Architectural, isn't it?
Bit cubist, really, isn't it?
Maybe we could say that Lud Dimple was a square. What do you think?
That's all right.
Lud Dimple prepared this, and this was incorporated. We just read about how Baba had it reviewed and asked for it to be included in the second edition of God Speaks, published in 1973. But one of the reasons that I want to show this is we have like the first manifestation, the second manifestation. These are the different certainty or gnosis, knowing existence. This is knowledge, this is manifestation, this is essence, consciousness, lover, etc. These different aspects of God. So the second, the first, the third is here, the third manifestation, the fourth manifestation, and the fifth manifestation. Okay, this is existence. wujud is the Arabic term for it. This is all from Ghani's stuff. He couldn't, I don't know anywhere else where he could have gotten this, as a matter of fact. Knowing existence, unitary existence, impossible or negative existence. Possible existence and necessary existence. These are wujud. Okay, this is a major doctrine that was developed by Ibn Arabi. You know Ibn Arabi, the perfect master. Most people would feel the supreme philosophical genius of Sufism. I mean, we have poets like Rumi and Hafez, but as a philosopher, Ibn Arabi reigns supreme, I would say, in the opinion of most people. And his followers systematized an idea of his called the 5 presences, or the 5 existences. The one would be God transcendent, God completely beyond creation, God aloof and alone in himself. The second would be God as the Lord of creatures, the theistic aspect of God, God who exists in relationship to his creation. Then there would be what in our lingo, our Baba lingo, we would call the mental universe, the subtle universe, and the gross universe. And there are terms for all of these that appear right on this chart. Well, I've seen this talked about, these 5 presences doctrine, as one of the most universal ideas in the world of spirituality, and you can find versions of it in many traditions all around the world. Other people have said this. Well, Ghani really dealt with it a lot, and it's right there in his manuscript. If he had written God Speaks, this would be a part of it. As it is, you can still find it if you go into the supplement. It is there. There's section 34 in the supplement on Tawhid. Tawhid means God's unity. You can actually ferret it out if you dig through that. But the book itself explains it much, much more. So this is a really major idea that would help to interrelate what Meher Baba has said to the entire world of mysticism and philosophy. And Dr. Ghani's book would be you'd find a lot about it there. There's another example of a really important idea in Ghani's manuscript.
Have you tried to talk Carl into having a look at Ghani's stuff?
You know, Carl is so busy that I try not to bother him. I bother him only about when I really need his help. I don't want to get him so that he regards me as a pest. No, but we need somebody like that, actually. Because in my opinion, Ghani, there are also real mistakes in Ghani's manuscript. In fact, I personally think this is a mistake, necessary existence. Although not at all agree with me, as the gross sphere. So you can, but if you actually go through this chart here, see, this is, I know you can't really read it, but this is like, okay, I won't even do it. I'll say this is the mental sphere, this is the subtle sphere, and this is the gross sphere. And this is God transcendent, and this is God in relationship to creation. So the whole chart is based on this idea of the 5 presences. Can you see it there? All the way across. This is the gross, subtle, mental, God beyond like the Majud state, and God as perfect master and avatar. So this idea of the 5 presences has actually organized this entire chart. You won't find that in the principal text of God Speaks. You will find it in the supplement, and Dr. Ghani's book engages this subject quite fully. So that's the kind of thing that is there. So if Ghani had wound up writing God Speaks, we'd have quite a different book than what we actually have.
It's quite good, isn't it? This is the original.
Huh?
It's the original, or have you changed it a bit?
Is what?
This is the original?
This chart?
Yeah.
Well, this is as published in God Speaks.
Now, when you consider the time and all those arrows and,
Yeah.
you know, because they didn't have the computers that we have today.
Mm. No, they hand drew it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lud Dimphal sent this to Baba in 1967, and in 1969 in the Darshan, Baba told, I guess Don Stevens or whoever, I forget who he gave it to, Lud maybe, to include this in God Speaks. So this is Lud Dimphal's work, reviewed by Baba and approved by him. And it incorporates a lot, at least sure, I'm just inferring, but a lot from Ghani. I don't see where else it could have been gotten from. Except for maybe but I mean the supplement of God Speaks is also taken from Ghani's work. You know, well, okay, let me get to the 10 states of God. What are we? Chapter itself. This was for me the really big surprise. Because, you know, Baba had it, well, all right, I'll only say the book attributes its authorship to Eruch. You saw it right there, right on there. But it turns out that the first draft was written by Ghani. So it's really a big surprise to me. So Baba must have given him this basic content, which he wrote up in the form of this chapter. And here's an illustration of what I mean when, okay, these are the 10 states of God as you'll find in the book itself. State 1, God, the beyond state. God in the beyond state. State 3, God as emanator, sustainer, and dissolver. State 4, God as the embodied soul, right? Well, here's Ghani's manuscript. God in beyond state. God in beyond state. God as emanator, sustainer, and dissolver. God is the embodied soul. Now look at those words, emanator, sustainer, and dissolver. The words that I would usually use are creator, preserver, and destroyer, right? Wouldn't you? But these are very nice words, emanator, sustainer, dissolver. When I see this very verbiage in Dr. Ghani's manuscript and in the published God Speaks, it makes me think, this is Baba's dictation. And Eruch copied it. I mean, obviously, when it's word for word the same. Here's a little, okay, here's how that first page of it looks. Chapter 2, 10 States of God. Now, see, this is Duncan's comment. He usually begins his comments by saying, Ghani! He didn't this time. Okay. This chapter needs an opening paragraph to explain what you are going to say. You plunge straight into the first state of God without any warning at all. Bar the chapter heading, and this makes one dizzy. One doesn't want to make someone like Dr. Duncan.
All the arrogance of the large.
That's right. It's so British from his era. But look at how Ghani responded.
Ghani an English speaker? Well,
Ghani?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Growing up in Pune, presumably, he would have
Oh,
learned
yeah.
that at school.
Oh, he was a brilliant guy.
Yeah.
He was the editor of the Mehrababa Journal. And so this was his response. He wrote all this material as an introduction, and basically in an edited form, this is what you will find in the opening of the 10 States of God chapter. And thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Ghani, for doing this. It's such valuable material. I mean, Dr. Ghani had the humility to take all these criticisms and respond. He pretty invariably did so. And here was this younger disciple behaving so obnoxiously, although Baba told him to do it. You remember that story of Bao's where Bao had just joined Baba, and Baba told him to go around to all the mandali each night and say, shut up, you fools, no talking after 9 o'clock, whether they were talking or not. And he even went to Gustaji, who had been keeping silence since 1927. Shut up, you fool, no talking after 9 o'clock. He hadn't been speaking for 30 years. So Baba would have young disciples do this. In other words, these may be great old disciples, but when I tell you to go after them, so Duncan did his job.
But I think Duncan's, his case is slightly different.
Yeah.
By this time, he had already written the Wayfarer,
Right.
which would have earned great respect from God. Because Dr. Ghani himself hadn't written anything like it.
Yeah, no, that is true. I think Dr. Duncan's brilliance would have been known by this time. Yeah, so that is true. Even so, with somebody like a Ghani or a Gustaji, I mean, these were the very originals. I would think it would have taken some
So
guts.
intellectually, Duncan had written a brilliant book. the
He had.
Wayfarer.
He had, and he had done it right at this very time, as a matter of fact, during this very
Before
period.
that.
But this is a little bit hard to read. I know it's a little bit, I won't try to bring up the stuff from God Speaks, but if you compare it, you can really find this in God Speaks. The downward journey of the oversoul, and just cross this out, to the lowest point of devolution as man, insan jivatma. Do you know what insan is? The Arabic word for man, and jivatma is the Hindu word for man. And sorry, I can't read it. The upward journey as the individual soul through those spheres to the can't quite read it. Culminating in the perfect man, insan e kamel, shivatma. Insan e kamel is a really important term in Ibn Arabi and others. Actually, if you're going to say that Islam asserted something like the avatar, their descriptions of the insan and kamel begin to sound like that. It's really an important idea, which Ghani, of course, would have known very well, are depicted in this chapter. These different states of God comprise the divine game of God, unconscious, sorry, I can't quite read something, becoming conscious man, or anyway, become God conscious.
No.
Sorry, I can't quite read it all.
In order to become conscious God changed in the book.
Yeah.
Unconscious God become conscious man, in order to become conscious God.
So here we see, in fact, I probably do have it right here. Let's see if I do. Yeah, okay, this is, no, this, I presume Eruch must have re-edited it into this form. You'll see the same thing. If we were to take a bird's eye view of this diagram, we should find that it depicts what is really the downward journey of the oversoul to the lowest point of devolution as man, insan, jivatma, and its upward journey again through the unfolding planes of consciousness, back to the original source, first as the divinely absorbed Majub e Kamel, and culminating finally in the perfect man, insan e Kamel, Shivatma. The 10 different states of God are principal stages on this journey, a journey in which unconscious God becomes conscious man in order to become conscious God. So we just read basically that in Dr. Ghani's draft, which he wrote in response to Duncan's criticism. Here's another, I've actually put these into a little table where it's a bit more readable. Let's see. Where did I put it? Oh, I know where it is. Here. So this is transcribed now. But this is the very next paragraph from what we were reading. This is that introductory stuff. So this is, Ghani wrote, "It is self-evident Meher Baba's gnosis without prevarication upholds the theory of wadat-ul-wujud, identityism, of Moinuddin Ibn Arabi, and Advaitism of Shankara." And in the actual published book, we find, Meher Baba's gnosis upholds without equivocation both the theory of identityism, wadat al-wujud, and the theory of Advaitism. So Eruch basically copied it, although he changed prevarication to equivocation, and he took out the names Ibn Arabi and Shankaracharya. In the chart, the 10 states of God. So here's what Ghani writes. In the 10 states of God, adumbrated by Meher Baba, it is God alone that plays the different roles, real and imaginary. The published book says almost exactly the same thing. In those 10 states of God by Meher Baba, it is made clear that it is God alone who plays the different roles, real and imaginary. Now here's something that Eruch cut out. The Muslim exoterics, not recognizing the theory of reincarnation, may fail to grasp the sublime gnosis, and it cannot be helped. The logic is simple, and Eruch just cut that out. So there was a lot of kind of comments about Muslim clerics, and that's completely removed from the 10 states of God. And we even come down, even all of this, the spiritual dictum of Islamic theology, huwal awal, huwal akhir, huwa zahir, huwal batin. He is first, he is last, he is the external, he is the internal. Can bear no other interpretations, and we have the same thing here, the spiritual dictum of Islamic theology. So Eruch just copied it. And then this couplet from Shabistari has been reproduced by Eruch. So basically Eruch took it and pruned it a bit and incorporated in the 10 states of God in many passages. However, there's a lot in Ghani's version that Eruch just cut out. And in fact, what Ghani did for a lot of this was he put in, here are some illustrations. He had a bunch of charts, and these had been published in the 1920s and 1930s. Ghani would have been part of that whole story. And he put these into the 10 states of God. Like this chart is one example. This is Ghani's version of it, and you can see the original published in Philosophy and Teachings by Ramju Abdullah. Or this one got crossed out, but it's God, stone, metal, vegetable, animal, human. So this is the evolutionary journey, and this is the creator point. And this was also taken from Ramju Abdullah. In fact, it had been published, both of these had been published before that in the Meher Baba journal, in the Meher Message, an earlier publication between 1929 and 1931. Here's another one, this is Ghani's version of the chart. You can see they're exactly the same. This is, another one. Baba actually gave this chart when he was talking to the Meher Ashram boys. This very chart is there. These are the 7 ranges of planets. These are, this is Earth here. A, B, and C are the 3 closely interconnected planets. And planet C, they're really, really brainy, much smarter than us. And then B, they're smarter than us. And A, we're kind of half heart, half head. Well, same thing. Baba gave it to the Meher Ashram boys. It was published in the Meher Message and published in Ramju Abdullah's rendering of all of this. So Ghani was bringing into the 10 states of God all kinds of stuff from the 1920s and the 1930s. He integrated it into there. And Eruch just took it all out. So if Ghani had done this chapter, we would have something much more historically comprehensive. We'd have stuff going back to all the beginnings of the whole deal. However, in the 10 States of God, as we have it in God Speaks, there's a lot there that was not in Ghani's version at all. In particular, here's one example of that. In the second state of God, which is here, I don't think the eldest see what Here's the first state of God. Now the second state of God starts right down here, right? And this is on the second state of God. And it continues all the way through here, all the way to this section. It's a very long discussion. Now what the second state of God is God in the beyond state. And in God Speaks, there's substate A, B, and C. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yeah.
Substate A is God as infinite unconsciousness. Substate B is God as infinite consciousness. And substate C is God as infinite consciousness along with infinite consciousness of the creation. And these are three substates of state 2. And it's one of the real enigmas of God Speaks, because these states seem to be mutually exclusive. Like God is infinite unconsciousness and God is infinite consciousness. They're opposites. You can't be both at once. But the second state of God encompasses all of this. So this is one of the deepest and most enigmatic and most profound sections of God Speaks, in my opinion. This whole discussion of the second state of God, which goes into all of this. That's completely missing from Ghani's account. So it leads me to wonder, maybe Baba had not differentiated between substates A, B, and C when he gave it to Ghani. Maybe this was something that he had just given to Eruch. So there's a lot in the published version that's not in Ghani's account either. So they're not just reproductions of each other, they're very, very different from each other. But there's no doubt at all that Ghani's version was the basis from which Eruch worked. So that's a little bit on that. I've gone into a lot of other very detailed things. But overall, I would say this about Ghani's book. God Speaks, in my understanding of it, is based on the narrative of the divine theme, which is the journey of the soul, which begin, the story where God, from the original state, has the whim, who am I? Out of that, the soul, the Jivatma, the drop soul, emerges and passes through the evolutionary journey from gas to stone, right up to human form, which it does by accumulating sanskaras. And in that journey, it becomes conscious. In human form, you reincarnate 8,400,000 times, where you're just spending sanskaras and getting new ones, until you enter the spiritual path and start the involutionary journey through the 7 planes of consciousness to the realization of God. Okay, in a nutshell, that's the narrative of the divine theme. We Baba lovers are well acquainted with this. Baba put this right at the center of what he explained to humanity. God Speaks uses this, is built on this idea, which it develops magnificently and in many very surprising ways. Out of its 10 chapters, chapters 2 through 7, Baba goes through the story of the divine theme a first time, with some elaborations on that. Chapter 8, which is very long, it's like 2/5 of the whole book almost. Baba goes through the divine theme a second time. He starts at the beginning with the whim and goes through to actually the avatar at the end. And chapter 9, which is the 10 States of God chapter, Baba goes through it a third time. So the whole book seems to me to be organized around the divine theme. Dr. Ghani's book is not organized around the divine theme at all. So if someone were to say, is Dr. Ghani's book a first draft of God Speaks? I would have to say it's not. It really isn't. It's a completely different book. The 10 States of God chapter is the first draft of what appeared in God Speaks, but the rest of the book isn't. So it's quite a separate book. So I can see why Baba was dissatisfied when he actually saw it. A lot of the content, actually Duncan is very, very sharp. Like one place he says, the paragraph that follows, what is your source for this? It sounds completely different from your usual writing style. Well, what Duncan means is, Baba dictated this to you, right? Say so. You know. So Duncan was very sharp. So I think there were a lot of passages like that. Direct dictations from Baba, which Ghani directly included. So it's very, very rich that way, but it's a completely different book than God Speaks, I would say. Okay, yeah.
The paper you gave in Maribad this year, that Pascal Kaplan was a mediator, you canvassed a lot of the Trust's editorial requirements.
Yeah.
And he being a theological graduate, was enjoying your presentation on that. You haven't canvassed any of that here today.
No, that was a different talk.
Oh.
That was on Trust editorial policy and that we're doing. But those questions would come up with something like this. What do you do with a manuscript like this? I would say I'm personally sure that some of its content registers Baba's own direct dictation. But it's not marked. And it's full of great profundities and great insights all over the place. But it's also kind of a mess. It's really needs a lot of rewriting.
It is a good project for you.
I would be interested, but it would take somebody who really knows Sufism also to be.
We could get a personal valet for you.
There we go.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be important in the future. We're only in the beginning stages of unpacking God Speaks. We've only started. But I think this will help to give some real cues and clues. There's one section, I didn't show it, but it's uses these three Sufi terms, ahadiyat, wajudiyat, I've forgotten what they are right now. And Duncan says, Ghani, what does this mean? And then he says later, this has no head or tail. You haven't introduced it beforehand and you haven't explained it afterwards. He's right, it hasn't been. But actually, it's a very important mystical Sufi doctrine. It probably comes from Jami or someone like that. And it's very profoundly significant. And the fact that Dr. Ghani felt that it belonged there could really be important in understanding that section of the 10 States of God. So in the future, I think this stuff will really matter. We haven't progressed to a stage in understanding of God Speaks where it's going to be understandable by many people yet. Yeah.
Well, what's the limitation, because the copyright's held in America by the Walnut Creek crowd, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of God Speaks. You're saying these things can be developed and rewritten and things. What's the situation with copyright?
Well, I don't see.
It'd be complicated, wouldn't it?
Well,
They'd
I mean,
have
this
to
is.
approve it, wouldn't they? Any official rewrite of parts of it?
Well, this wouldn't be rewriting God Speaks. This would be Dr. Ghani's original manuscript.
Which is out of
Yeah,
copyright.
right.
Which probably is out of copyright, yeah, because he died in 1951.
So would the trust have copyright over that?
probably nobody does.
Yeah.
It's probably in the public domain. So, I mean, I think it could be done. And I would hope that reasonable people would not stand in the way of such a project anyway.
We hope for reasonable people. What planet are you on?
Well, here at Avatar's Abode, it's all reasonable people.
That's right.
But I realize that elsewhere, maybe less so. No, I think it's inevitable that this will get done and published in the course of time. You can't block something of this significance. It will be quite a job, though. One of the things that I don't like is that sometimes, I won't mention examples, although I very well could, but they'll just take things and rush them to publication. And, you know, you have to be prepared to give these projects what they're due. And if you're not prepared to give 10 years to it, don't start. You know, really, these are big jobs. But people just rush it out into print, and it's really outrageous to treat things from Baba that way. This would really entail a lot of deep, deep study.
Well,
Yeah.
I noticed that you said, I think you said, that the God Speaks doesn't contain anything about love, but in Dr. Ghani's manuscript it does.
There is a chapter on love. Yeah.
And it's only 6 pages long.
You're right. You noticed that. Yeah.
So would it be interesting to explore that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. As I remember, that chapter is related to something that was in the Mirror Message and in Ramju Abdullah's book, where there's a little bit on love. But you notice, like, even in the discourses, the discussions of love are kind of, they're not like, all right, where you really find the wine-sipping type discussions of love is like in the Everything and the Nothing. I think Francis was a big help in getting some of that stuff expressed that way. But even the discourses of love are kind of analytical, actually. And they're not that Sufi flavor of things. So even it's an interesting thing that Baba himself was, of course, the fountain of pure wine. And that kind of discourse would go on around him. But when he explained things in his written messages, it often was not that way. And the Everything and the Nothing really is a breakthrough book of Baba's in that sense.
I think when people say God speaks is not about love, people want to qualify that. Because God speaks is about God. God is love.
Yeah.
So if one says it's not about love,
I think a really big
it's not
book,
about sentimentality.
I think a big book on this very point will be Baba's talks to the Meher Ashram boys, which are highly philosophical. And these boys were going mad with love as a result of Baba's explanations to them. It's a really amazing concurrence of the two.
He ended each talk
Yes.
by actually
Right.
enjoining upon them
Enjoy.
to
What about the book?
meditate on prayer.
Well, when are you going to bring it out, John?
And thinking of the love thing, the preliminary warming up for Ghani of this was Barbara reading
Hafiz, right? Right.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
right.
21
That's a
days.
good point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah. And of course, Ghani knew that stuff. I haven't adequately expressed how this manuscript is saturated with poetry, with poetic couplets all over the place, from Persian and Urdu.
Okay.
Ghani was really quite a treasure house of knowledge about this stuff. But it's interesting, like in one place he uses the word logos, and Duncan rips him to shreds, saying you completely misused it. In Christian theology, logos refers to the second person of the Trinity, and so Ghani just took it out. So there's very little Christian reference, actually. And there's very little Christian reference in God Speaks, too. You know, some of those charts will say, Vedantic term, Sufi term, Christian mystical term, or whatever it is. Well, all that mystic term means is the English language. It's not Christian mystical at all. And it doesn't seem like Christian mysticism added a whole lot to the discussion of these
Tom
things.
can even write about that.
Did he?
Logos being the second.
Yeah, he did. He did say that.
No, but is that correct?
In the
Was it a
beginning
fair
was the
criticism?
Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was of God. I think,
The Trinity is the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
yeah, and Logos as the Son. I think it's correct, but I'm not, I'd have to take a dip into
Is
St.
the Son
Augustine.
I am the
Logos
Word,
made
the truth,
flesh,
and the light, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm the light, the truth. Yeah.
I think Logos is the Tao, is God impersonal. The Son is Logos made flesh.
Yeah.
But
Anyway, he said it, and Ghani took it out. And it was one of the only Christian references that I saw in the whole thing. Ghani was not, I mean, he really knew Sufism. He wasn't profoundly versed in Hinduism or Christianity, although he was a smart guy, and naturally he would have known a lot of, I mean, you couldn't be around Baba without picking a lot of that up. But that was not his particular expertise there, whereas Sufism was. Although it does appear to me that he made some mistakes. I do think there are some mistakes even in that chart, in my opinion. Although not all agree with me on that point.
Well, you were talking before about Eruch Jessawala, and I don't know if anyone's interested, but we've got 4 hours of Eruch Jessawala, and I think Ivy Juice talking about God Speaks, and
Wow.
quite possibly the preparation of it. We've got it here on tape, original
Oh.
copies.
That would be
of it.
interesting.
Yeah. So
Well-
I don't know if anyone's interested in sitting through sections of it sometime,
I
but
might be.
David's got the
Mm.
tapes and the tape recorder.
I have to say that that chart 11 is a formidable accomplishment. It really, he really studied closely, and especially for when he did it. I mean, that was early 60s, the mid 60s. It's quite an impressive job. And Baba accepted it to be there in God Speaks. You can really learn a lot from that chart. In fact, you can really learn a lot about what Ghani had to say from that chart, because a lot of it is Ghani's material. Also, some of the Wayfarer's material that Baba dictated for that has been incorporated into that chart, done by Lebanon Paul. Okay, well, thank you very much. And the next one will be in 2 weeks on spiritual subtle physiology. So those of people who want, I genuinely mean it, who are interested in the body and the significance of the body, may have things to contribute, because I'm not an expert on any of that. Okay.
Jai Baba.